Good morning, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And McDuff Lives refers to my father, and of course, we think of him as kind of a guiding spirit or a hand on my shoulder. And as we explore and expose his career, we are also exploring and exposing the corruption of the United States as the end of World War II put new people in power, but people behind the scenes were still manipulating our economy, our culture, and our lives. So it's secretly intensified now to the point where we are facing a technological empire imposing its will on us individually, big brother style, keeping an eye on us and putting social metrics on us, seeing what kind of metrics they can glean from us. And then they're also studying our genes and our DNA and trying to really be able to micromanage us in a way that people 100 years ago just dreamed of. Well, it's those dreams of those people, the ones that wanted to keep everything the way they've had it, the way they wanted it, that have driven us to where we're at today with things like the roads trusts, the roads wills that we've only seen one of the supposed five of them, but the effect of that has been to create these ongoing chains of power that derive back really to people, all of whom have been dead for a century by now. Nevertheless, their hand still keeps shaping our world in a very evil way so as to sustain the powers that existed back then and to quash any new developments, especially keeping us from gaining the technological advantages that would allow us to be free of their banking system. So that's my theme in a broad sense this morning. It's in my way of putting it in a nutshell, Semper Eadem on one side and the rights of man on another side, on the other side. And that is what the American Revolution supposedly was about, the rights of man. So, oh, pardon me, I think my phone, apologize. Okay, I'll let it ring. So while that's ringing away, why don't I just play this tune for you? That I love this tune. It's called "The Rights of Man." It's an old fife tune, flute tune from the early 1800s, uh, inspired by the writings of Thomas Paine and his writing, "The Rights of Man." So let me play a little "Rights of Man" here on this beautiful brass whistle that was made for me by Michael Copeland a number of years ago. And this is a fife tune, so you can imagine people marching to it. But the theme of it is not to just be a soldier, but to have human rights. Well, just a little taste of the tune there. It's one of my favorites, Irish hornpipe, but it's really about the rights of man. And you can imagine that tune being played in the French Revolution as well as in the American setting. Now, let me ask Andy if he would roll our first piece of tape this morning. This is a video of a movie called The Story of a Patriot. And this is the example I wish to use for the theme Semper Eadem, which is Latin for always the same, never changing. And it is the theme of the aristocrats, the royalty, and the plantation owners of the early republic. So think about bucolic fantasies. 1957 made. Williamsburg, Virginia. Supposedly around 1773, 4, 5.
Look, I found a duck with a broken wing. Where's Master Rabbit?
He's in the house. His father's sleeping this morning. Look out, Sonny. Horse is coming by.
Bring the horses over here. Make sure them saddlebags don't slip. Mr. Fry got a long ride ahead of him.
How far is it going?
All the way to Williamsburg.
Who's going with him?
He's going regular.
Where'd Papa go?
Saying goodbye to grandfather.
Over there by him. Your father would have been vastly proud, John, to know that you had been elected to fill his place.
It's a deep responsibility, Mother. I trust I've inherited his wisdom as well as his property.
All right, and that's where I want to stop for this the first little clip from this movie.
Your father's last letter to
You
me.
you may recognize the gentleman there who's addressed as John as being none other than Jack Lord, the future star of Hawaii Five-0. And this is a movie that when I began, when I went to William and Mary, the freshman orientation included sitting and watching this movie. And you can imagine in the fall of 1970, in the height of the Vietnam War protests, that we students kind of made fun of this movie. We thought it was a riot. And there was a kind of a game going on to try to spot the school buses that would sometimes be shown in the background. I personally haven't seen them, but I'm told that they're there, the little green buses that drove around Williamsburg for the benefit of the students. Well, my point here is, if you consider this man as a typical Virginia, what should we call him? Landowner, a citizen, a British citizen, and somebody who has considerable wealth, property. And when we say property, we include, unfortunately, the enslaved people that are so prevalent in that movie. And this is the idea of always the same, okay? Is that if you are an elite person living in your great castle or whatever in England, and you have this incredible income that keeps coming to you from the United States, because you get these, from the colonies, from the colonies, because you own the right to the tobacco that perhaps your descendants are still owning the property, and you get something out of that. But the idea of continuing a colonial empire means to never change. And this was the British mercantile system in a nutshell, was that you would have an elite person like John in the movie, who would be the pater familias, right? The guy that everybody looks to make the decisions. And he would take the decision as the movie unfolds, to abandon his deceased father's politics, which were completely royalist, and to say, no, we are going to rebel. We're going to fight for the rights of man. So what is the difference between somebody who wants to continue the Semper Eadem, that is the bucolic fantasy with the happy enslaved people? You didn't see any unhappy enslaved people in this movie, right? You saw them. One was a skilled cooper making a barrel there. The others were chopping wood and doing other things that are productive. The kids are running around, not really having anything to do except for to go out and find a stray goose or something, like the little boy did. And oh, by the way, that little boy's name, I believe, was Cato. And when we saw that movie, the child was asked, what's your name? And the little boy looks up and says, Cato, I reckon. And so we named our cat Cato. That was back in 1970, believe it or not. Well, Cato, of course, being one of the heroes of the revolutionary thinkers, somebody that would be inspirational to the patriot John, the star of the story, and our Jack Lord. What is it that makes people decide that what they have here is not enough? Well, I looked at Benjamin Franklin for the answer, because Benjamin Franklin was, as you recall, very much interested in technology. And aside from the fact that the British mercantile system didn't let any actual money get into the colonies, but made us use casks of tobacco for payment, for receipt, for everything, that the British would work everything so that all of the real valuable, like gold, for instance, ends up in their hands. And all that we have is our labor and all of this land. And then, of course, we have, over the past 150 to 200 years at that point, been accepting enslaved people and enslaving them. Well, this is a confusing situation, because there you have this patriotic man who's fairly wealthy, who has everything he needs. He's got servants, he's got slaves, he's got all the land he needs, he's got beautiful horses, he's got beautiful buildings, and yet he's willing to give up all that in order to secure the rights of man, according to the story we're told about the American Revolution. But let's recognize that he wasn't going to give up his rights to enslave other people. That was part of his culture, and he had no concept of any way to live other than with servants, with slaves. Nevertheless, he felt that his life was being constrained by what? By the taxes. But what's more importantly, it's the mercantile system itself, which is what Benjamin Franklin recognizes, is that they're not going to let us have advanced technology. They're not going to encourage us to build factories or to build our own mills. I mean, it started in New England, but generally what they wanted was large areas of farmland where they could make crops such as cotton, indigo, and food crops. But tobacco was the big thing, of course, in Virginia and Maryland at the time. So that motto, the Semper Eadem of Queen Elizabeth I, and this also we find in Shakespeare, where everyone is to stay within their own bounds. A shoemaker, stick to your last, right? That is part of the imperial system. And we learn this from studying Webster Tarpley, that it was the Emperor Diocletian way back in the 400 AD era that recognized that if he wanted to keep his peasants on the farm, he had to force them to stay. And that was the imposition of the tradition that if you're a farmer, your son's going to be a farmer, his son's going to be a farmer. If you are a miller, your son's going to run the mill, his son's going to run the mill. And that tradition basically forestalls the ability of that person or his son to rise up in the world, to learn more about technology. Consider the difference between Scotland and Ireland. Two Celtic countries, both conquered by the British. We talk about the Hanoverian British, when, after Queen Anne dies and you get George I, along with the Duke of Marlborough, who are the essential parts of keeping Britain and the British mercantile system dependent upon slavery, not only upon the slaves themselves, but upon the slave trade, from which so much money is made, both in England and in New England, where the shipping magnates have, by and large, enriched themselves with slavery. Compare Scotland, which was conquered a number of times, but in the early 1700s, and then you have the clearances in 1720 or so, getting rid of all the old Scottish pastoral culture. The Semper Eadem of Scotland was defeated by the technological and military prowess of the soon-to-be British Empire, the Hanoverians. That led to the incorporation of Scotland into Britain and bringing the Scots Celtics into the servitor positions. As we love that word servitor, we see it says so much from Professor Hamamoto, that the Scots, who then went on to do things like conquer the question of how to determine longitude by the stars, the ability to make clocks that didn't fail, and all of the other technological advances of the Scots were encouraged and allowed by the British Empire. Whereas in Ireland, there was no such absorption of the Irish into the British Empire. The Irish, being Catholics, were not capable of being absorbed into the British system. So the Irish were kept at that pastoral level, at that level where they will never rise up. And in fact, when the British decided there was too many of them, they simply took all the food away and reduced the population by somewhere between 50% and 60%. So as Benjamin Franklin experiments with electricity and learns the advances at the British and French philosophical societies, the Royal Society, and then the French similar thing, where they would get together with the smart people of the day that had the access to all the knowledge and the learning. And what Franklin saw was that America was growing, but it needed technology in order to grow. And it needed to have the spirit of freedom inside the people, had to have the ability to go forward through technology. So instead of rolling hogsheads of tobacco down to the ships once or twice a year, and then in exchange for that getting some new clothes and some new furniture, you would be able to build your own cash flow system within your state or your colony or your community, but to advance yourself, to advance your community, and to advance generally the idea that a merchant doesn't have to be a merchant forever. A shoemaker doesn't have to be a shoemaker forever. A person could have a dream in their heart and say, I'm going to go for this. I'd like to be a composer. I'd like to be a ship captain. I'd like to be a lawyer to defend the rights of people in court, instead of just having to do what your father did. That is Semper Eadem. That is what the British want. And that, I think, is what we're looking at today as we see this technological nightmare approaching. We think they've laid the ground for it, through things like Star Trek and Star Wars and, the Borg and all that. They're telling us, hey, this is the way life is going to be. And we might be amused by it, but it also lays a psychological foundation to say, oh, okay, well, maybe that's the way it's always been. Maybe we're going to forget about freedom and get back to living our lives within the bounds set for us, whether it be growing tobacco or working in a certain factory or having to be a soldier, that we will be responding to the needs of the state and not vice versa. So why did we rebel? We rebelled because we wanted to be free human beings. That is to claim what the philosophers of the time were calling the rights of man. And that's what we did. And when the Constitution was finally written up and the Virginia delegation said, we're not going to sign that unless you include the rights of man. And George Mason and others put together and used, what had already been written in many cases, the Bill of Rights. And they put that Bill of Rights into the document itself, the first 10 amendments. It's an integral part of our Constitution. That is what protects us from the other system, the system of what John Foster Dulles would like to do, and that is basically to go back to serfs, slaves, owners, banks, and rulers, the medieval world. As the war was won and the British were, of course, always trying to reverse that victory that we had, they created all kinds of barriers for us, and we've still facing British interference. As a matter of fact, it looks to me like the British are very much behind what we're calling this coup that's been going on since January 6th, if not before. The coup that is taking away the people's access to their own Congress with these fences and armed guardsmen and SWAT teams standing around, keeping us away from the people's own house. This imposition is the end of the dream of the American patriots. And that's why so many of us are unwilling to give up no matter what. John Foster Dulles distinguished between what he called dynamic civilizations and lazy or basically worthless civilizations. And he would consider, the Nazis as a good model, a dynamic model in which that state takes control of its people and turns them into a unified force to achieve the state's goals, where in that case, it was the goal of taking territory, getting rid of the people that live there, spreading out and creating more, the Junkers, the Prussian nobility, and then the Austrian nobility. They wanted to get back to dominating these estates, farms, fondi, I think in Italian, the fountain of wealth of a particular family. So as we learned about Venice and the Venetian families, the oligarchs, they made a deal among themselves that no more oligarchs could come in. And the same thing has happened in Great Britain, and the same thing has happened basically in New England. And that is that if you're not already in one of those families, like the Swans and the Muellers and well, you know who I'm talking about, the Bissells, for goodness sakes, and all the other wealthy ancient money that's rooted really in the slave trade or the opium trade or other things that right now would bring shame upon a family, but they don't talk about that. They've still got the money and they're going to hang on to it. They like the idea of consolidating people into economic units, like the gangs of workers on a slave plantation, taking people like you and me and putting us to work. And that's what they did, of course, with the prisoners of war, whether didn't matter what their religion was. If they're a prisoner of war, that means that they're a loser and they're there to be exploited, put into the uranium mines or whatever else that they wanted to do to, building their underground factories and rocket facilities, Nordhausen, and you know the story about that. The division of the human population between those happy, active ones that utilize everyone else and the rest of us who have no choice. When this technological net descends upon us, we're not going to have the choice of saying no. So that's where I think we have to draw the line and say, no, we have to stand for individual rights. We have to be the people that defy this technological nightmare that's coming. What am I talking about? I'm talking about satellites. I'm talking about satellites that are going to be so many. There's hundreds of thousands of satellites, and they're all going up there to do things like keep track of you and me, to eventually get some kind of a tag into us, whether from just some little smart dust that we breathe or putting it into us by an injection, courtesy of some need for a vaccine, for instance. The bottom line is, right now, this country, this country here that was founded by the Patriots back then, and now has expanded into this incredible empire, with the 50 stars, and the empire itself is not owned by the American people. It's owned by these banks. So it's going to collapse if we keep letting these banks run our country. My sense of logic tells me that we've got to separate our politics, our Congress, from the banks, because the banks have this usury policy that they just keep on getting more and more interest over years and decades and hundreds of years on a loan, very much like a loan shark or a mafia guy would, just continue to get money because of loaning the money. And that income takes away from everybody else. How can we maintain our individual rights at the same time that we're allowing these corporations, these international mega corporations, to create cartels of everything from transportation to food to healthcare to education, and everything is going to be forced into a return to Semper Eadem, always the same. You work for the car manufacturer doing such and so, and if the economy keeps going that way, your son's going to do the same thing. There's no going to be any more upward mobility. that's like George Carlin said, that, there is a club and you ain't in it. And that club is small by comparison to the population, but it's gotten so strong by its dominance of technology. That is a big problem they have, is that if we were able to use things like they can use, then we would conquer our own lack of resources by being smart, by like the people that made fuel for cars out of vegetable oil maybe 20 years ago. Well, they were going around collecting old oil from French fry, cookers in the McDonald's and running their cars on it. And people say it smelled like French fries when they drove by. Well, that's fine, but see what that does is it undercuts the system. And that is what the illustration at the beginning of this show was about, was to show there's a system here. There's a system for the slaves and the system for the families and the system for the wealthy and a system for the government. And it all had to do with maintaining everything exactly the way it is. That's what they've done with oil. They've made oil the only fuel for vehicles. And when that person or people tried to do that vegetable oil thing, bad things happened to them. I don't remember exactly what, but you saw it disappear very quickly. Hemp is another great example. This country was built on hemp. George Washington was a huge hemp farmer. Hemp was very, very useful for making clothes, for making rope, for all kinds of ways to avoid having to go outside of your farm. If you could make it out of hemp, then you didn't need to go to the store and buy it. So that's been the story of the 20th century, is getting rid of hemp. And if we could just bring it back, we could get back to making clothes with it. We could do all kinds of things with hemp. We could even make cars like Henry Ford did out of hemp, if we were permitted to. Who's stopping us? Well, it's the government, but it's the government being controlled through the banks and the big corporations that have already carved up the pie and said, well, here, you get to make the money from transportation, you get to make the money from manufacturing, you get to make the money from whatever else, building roads. There's always the asphalt concession, right? Every 5 to 10 years, every street starts to crumble, and because they keep using asphalt, they're not going to make it out of better materials. They're not going to make it out of macadam or spend a little more money to make something that lasts forever, because they've got that concession. The local asphalt guys are going to get that work, and you can count on it. The increase of freedom on an individual level is a direct threat to the freedom of the elites, and that's the problem. I'm going to just take a moment and check with the chat room over here. Being an independent author, it's a shock to note the art of the book deal. I'm not sure what it is yet, so maybe you can tell me. The French fry thing was funny. 5th grade only needs one history teacher. 6th grade only one history teacher. The teacher should be John. No, it should be me. Okay. I think kids would change if we told them the truth. Kids know what the truth is, don't they? They have this amazing way of knowing when you're BSing them. And I think you're right. If we could just talk about the truth. But, who's going to let me go out into my front yard and grow a patch of hemp so I don't have to, nobody. It can't do it. It's illegal. Okay. Think also about what we learned from reading Population Control the other night about Teddy Roosevelt and his British connections, and what did Roosevelt do that hurts the common person? Well, he closed the West. He closed the whole Western frontier. He said, no more of those settlers are going to go out there and settle in the great American West. We're going to keep it for something called conservation. But what that really does is it deprives all those people of the opportunity of developing new cities, new farms, new ways of surviving, new ways of living that would have been developed had Roosevelt not closed down the American West. Everything's getting closed down now. You're not going to be able to do anything, and everything has got a patent number. Everything has gotten copyrighted, and you can hardly even sing a song without getting a copyright strike anymore. It's funny, I do get copyright strikes sometimes, but they just say, well, if you're not monetizing it, then it doesn't matter. Nothing's going to happen. Well, that's okay. But everybody's intimidated by playing a song on their YouTube because they're afraid of getting a copyright strike. And if you are monetizing, like selling advertising on your show, which I'm not doing right now, then you will get you'll get a copyright strike. But all I'm saying is they have cornered every single market that there is. They have passed laws that make it impossible for us to use our brains, to use technology, to use the science that has been developed. We could talk about the Majestic 12 Committee. And what were they doing but hiding technology? There's technologies we don't know about that have been developed in World War II through the Manhattan Project and otherwise that would allow us to escape a lot of the drudgery that we suffer from. But there is where the line is drawn, is that we are no longer allowed to expand our economic influence. We're not allowed to grow. We are, in fact, being depopulated, and depopulated by a number of different means, from fouling our air and our water to our food, to inserting killer genes into our corn that will make us unable to procreate, by doing everything they can, in other words, to discourage us, to make us miserable, to take away the joy of our lives, and reduce our ability to travel, to do things that are fun. Remember how they basically shut down civil aviation after 9/11. People who invested in airplanes, little private planes, a Beechcraft Bonanza, or one of those little Piper Cubs. A lot of people were buying those, but nowadays, why would you have one? You can't fly it. You can't go anywhere without an elaborate flight plan, and it just make it impossible for us to enjoy the fruits of technology. That's why we rebelled in the first place, because we were stuck in this Semper Eadem world. And even if you were one of the ones that ran the pup, like John in the movie, even if you were wealthy and well-fed and had everything you needed, if you're being taxed without your authority, if you're being constrained into what you can buy and sell, if you're not allowed to sell your crops other than to Great Britain, if you are unable to do as you wish to, as the rights of man would tell you, then even he's going to rebel. That's the way it was then. What is it like now? Are people going to stand up for their rights? As Bob Marley says, get up, stand up. Don't give up your rights. Stand up for your rights. Are people ready to do that? Are willing to do that? As the spring comes, I think we're going to see people hitting the streets again. And the people that attended the MAGA rallies, they're standing up for their rights. the people that showed up on the mall on January 6th, they're standing up for the rights. And as much as they tried to pervert that into a false flag operation in which these patriots get blamed, the fact is that we have proven that that's false. You know, through the reporting of our team and other teams, we've shown that the people that went there were ordinary Americans, people who want to stand up for individual rights for all Americans, not just themselves, but find themselves quashed, slandered, abused, and actually called the opposite of what they are. And that is, they are patriots, but they're called otherwise. Thomas McDonough says, it feels too late trying to be positive. Education has failed us. Well, education has been perverted, and it might not be as late as you think, because the human mind is just like those children we were talking about a little while ago. The human mind wants to learn. The human mind wants to improve its condition, the condition that it lives in. And only through constantly discouraging us, constantly sending us bad messages and taking apart our families and taking apart our communities and locking us down, they're trying to extinguish the flame inside of us, the flame of learning, the flame of improving not only our own lives, but those of our family and friends and community and our culture and our nation. They want us to lose the ability to think about what I'd like to do and to slip into that kind of trance-like life, really almost like animals, where every day you get up, every day you go to your carpenter's bench, every day you sit down and you make what you have to make for the boss, for the owners. And every day you eat the same thing. Every day you go to bed at the same time, and always the same. Semper Eadem. If they can reduce us to the status of sheep or cattle, then they win. But they can't do it because we're not sheep. We're not cattle. We understand the way this works. And we understand our responsibility as citizens to preserve the rights of humanity. Now, I was watching a little earlier today as I was having my coffee. I was watching a movie of Operation Overlord. And Operation Overlord was June 6, 1944, the long-awaited, long-hoped-for liberation of Europe by the Western Allies, launched from England, from Great Britain, and landing in Normandy in France. And you see these people, you know, these young guys, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them, loading onto transport ships. And you see these landing craft going up to the beach, and they jump out of the landing craft and they go running up against all this machine gun fire, running against mortar fire and cannon fire, and they're running onto the beach, and just to grab a beachhead, knowing what, that half of them are going to get shot, a quarter of them are going to die, and they're going to suffer. But they did it. Why did they do it? They did it to fight the same thing that we have to fight today. That is a totalitarian, top-down, imperial, Nazi establishment that never went away after World War II, that took its money and hid it and invested it, and now they are coming back. I mean, I expect them to show us the swastikas on their arms just about any day. You know, just put those little swastikas on there, and the whole game is obvious to everyone that we will no longer ever have any freedom. How close can we get with concertina wire wrapped around our capital? So what's happened to our citizens? What's happened to the people that voted for Mr. Basement Biden? What happened to them? They got psychologically manipulated, didn't they? And the whole time they were told that we're the ones that got psychologically manipulated. We're the dumb white people, right? Well, unfortunately, it turns out that they're the ones that got fooled, and we're the ones that saw what was going on. Excuse me. So, Andy, if you could go ahead and play that second clip from the story of a patriot, I'll go ahead and wrap the show up, because I think, you know, if it was me, and well, you know, I also have another thing to say, and that is about the enslaved people, the black people in the movie, is that, you know, that it's true, the American Revolution wasn't about freeing them. And the big difference now is that human rights are predominant over race. At that time, especially in Virginia and the South, race was more important than human rights. But in order to get this country to a point where human rights became the most important thing, these people rebelled and brought about a situation legally where the immorality, the wrongness of slavery gradually became apparent. And even without the Civil War, most economists will tell you that it would have died out. So we are, in a sense, the vanguard of human rights in the world, even though we had the tragedy of slavery and enslaved people during our revolutionary era and for the first 50, 60 years. If we hadn't gotten free from Great Britain, then there would not be this tradition of government of, by, and for the people. The forces that are restricting African Americans now are the same forces that restricted them before the Civil War. And that is not the average citizen. That is the banks. That is the aristocracy. That is the rich people that want everything to stay the same forever and ever and ever. And it is by imposing on us this division, this ongoing sense of racial superiority of one race over another, that, you know, look from D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. That is psychological propaganda to sustain the British myth that human rights don't extend across all races. They do. We are now at the crossroads. Are we going to continue the fight for universal human rights, or are we going to let this nation fall to the oligarchs, to the totalitarians, to the technological nightmare that many of us foresee? Well, let's wrap it up by reviewing the very end of this movie, The Story of a Patriot. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Aaron, for being with us this morning. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. And I hope you enjoy this little clip from The Story of a Patriot.
Mr.
Huzzah, they say. And off they go. (1957), a picture of America that's not shown anymore. Pretty much kept under wraps. You don't see these old pictures where there were enslaved people that were part of the crowd that didn't seem to be terribly oppressed, but it's real. They really were there. And you go to Colonial Williamsburg today, that's one of the things that you miss is you think,
one wants to be free,
where's all
one must learn to choose.
of the black people?
May God help us always to make the right choice. I am now, as ever, your loving husband, John.
All right, so let's make the right choice. Thanks for being with us this morning. And now, Andy, why don't you tell us what's going on next? Because I know you have another show coming up, and we want to keep. You can shut that off now, Andy, if you would. Maybe you are busy getting ready for the next show. If that's the case, then
John, can you hear
me? Yeah, I hear you. So, Andy, you want to tell everybody about the next show?
Yes, we are going over to the Belton Road Show here with George Webb, and it's going to be broadcast every day, Monday through Friday from 12 p.m. to noon. If you guys just want to stay on the stream here, I'm going to attempt to do this for the first time where I just transition from the McDuff show to the Belton Road show. Some of you guys may need to, I guess, go over to the other show as guests. But if you're on Facebook or Twitter or Club Osprey watching, I'm going to log off the McDuff channels and I'm going to switch over to the Belton Road show. So if you guys want to continue watching, just go to the Belton Road show. Great show today, John. The British banking empire definitely has their hands on some things over here in America. And I appreciate all the hard work you do trying to enlighten us and connecting the dots from our history to what's going on nowadays. And it's very important. So I'm happy I'm your companion in this ride we got going on. So just thanks for educating us all, John.
Oh, get out of here. I forgot to say one thing I wanted to say, and that is Prince George's County, the great big county, one of the wealthiest counties in the country and the home of National Harbor. It has as its flag the English Red Cross on a white field. That takes us back to Semper Eadem. And what is the motto of Prince George's County, Maryland? It is Semper Eadem. So the idea is not gone at all. So thanks again, Andy, and thanks for your kind words. And everybody get over to the Belton Road show and let's see what George Webb and the gang have cooked up this morning. Thanks again. Bye now.
Thanks, John. All right, guys, just bear with me for a couple seconds here. I'm going to be removing John's streams from the connection here. And we're going to be going over to the Belton Road show. Aaron, you are officially on screen, so please get off. Thank you, guys. Unless you got something to say, Aaron. I didn't even have the mic up to my face. How terrible is that? I wasn't prepared at all. But the Belton Road show is kicking off right about now. Just waiting for Mr. George Webb to sign on here. If he's, I sent him the link earlier. So we got a lot going on here at Neighborhood News Studio. We're trying to connect a lot of the dots here, like John's doing from our history to our present day state. Mr. George, we're going to be doing a lot of different shows. We got Research Revival at night on top of the Belton Road show. We have, in fact, I'm just gonna end the broadcast right now, guys. Go over to the Belton Road show. I think we're having some struggles getting some guys linked here. I'm getting some messages now, so I'm gonna end this broadcast and kick off a new one. And the Belton Road show shall be starting here shortly.